If you could time travel and meet your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, now there's a question. Well, if I think about B2B sales and my career, I think that I would tell myself to find a mentor, or two or three, to help me shortcut the distance between kind of getting my first B2B sales job and being successful. Because for me, that was a 7-year period, which was incredibly frustrating and had a lot of ups and downs. In fact, 2005. So I got into the industry in 2000. 2005, I actually lost my job for poor performance. And I think that if I had a mentor or two, I would have been able to shortcut that and perhaps not have so much of a rocky time in the early years.
Nice. Great piece of advice. Great piece of advice. And unfortunately enough, I've got you, right? So, so that's one of my many mentors. Cool.
Yes.
Welcome everyone to the Walking Digital Corridors podcast, officially the newest podcast to hit the airwaves. Probably a title that we've already lost, right, in the current age. But we've set this up just to have a sort of informal chat and deep dive into some of the topics that are really challenging the industry at the minute. I'm Jordan Abbott, your host, B2B social influence and interaction advisor at Supero, and today we are joined by my old man, Alex Abbott.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries.
Yeah, you want me to say a few words about myself?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Alex Abbott, 23 years experience within B2B sales, 30 years altogether in sales. Started out door-to-door selling Kirby vacuum cleaners, if anyone's heard of those. So 30 years ago, the vacuum cleaner was £1,300. So you can imagine how easy it was to sell those. Today, after a long career in B2B sales, I run a company called Supero. We're a B2B sales consultancy, and very pleased to be working with my family, of which Jordan is part of the team.
Indeed, and we're fortunate enough to have you. Great. So obviously, I've taken a load of nuggets and gems from you and your experience, and I think today's topic is one that's particularly pertinent, and one I know that we talk about quite frequently offline. Is the traditional sales funnel broken or obsolete? I'd love for you to share what you've already shared with me.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think the short answer is yes, especially if we think about a complex B2B sales scenario, and and I'm thinking about a recent article that I wrote, and some of the statistics that we're now experiencing within our industry. So, I think for years, certainly if you look back 13 or so years ago when Brent Adamson and Matt Dixon created the Challenger sale, a lot of the research that they did found that the buyers were almost 60% of the way through their purchasing journey by the time they would invite a supplier or a seller in to help. And Forrester, I think, said it was closer to 90%. If I think about my own experience in that time and how hard it was to develop pipeline and win business, I know myself, I adapted, running sales teams of 20 up to 40 people. We would do things that were very different to what was traditionally done. So, for example, we didn't cold call, and we did cold email, but we would also try and do things like community building type initiatives, or create pipeline generating initiatives that brought people together around shared values. And that was essentially me trying to do lots of different things within that traditional funnel to increase performance. And I think it wasn't until I left the corporate world in 2020 and set up Sapiro when I really started to think about how a lot of what we've done traditionally in sales doesn't work. And for at least a year now, I've been thinking, is the system broken? Is that traditional sales funnel broken? Is it becoming obsolete? I look at very credible organizations like Winning by Design and Jacco van der Kooi, who's very vocal. He does lots of videos about his approach. But recently on LinkedIn, he posted some analysis that his organization has done that found that pipeline generation rates are plummeting. This is in the last 2 years. Pipeline generation rates are plummeting, and close rates have dropped almost as high as 50%. And that's across a spectrum of SMB through to enterprise. So it's not necessarily the most complex B2B, sales engagements. It's across the spectrum, and we know the buyer, the purchase process, the buyer journey is becoming more complex. It's more difficult. It's more difficult to predict. We know that businesses are very focused on the sale and the sales message and generating pipeline. And that in itself, I think, is partly to blame. The reason buyers don't want to speak to sellers is because they're being sold to all the time. Now, all of this stuff combined reminds me of the horseshit crisis in the late 1800s, and the fact that the Times wrote an article about the fact that London and New York had 150,000 horses trotting their streets. That was causing or creating a lot of horse manure. They couldn't clean it fast enough. It was causing disease, attracting lots of flies. It was a big problem. And this article was saying that unless we find a solution to the problem, the streets of New York and London will be buried under 9 feet of horse manure. And it took several years, but it prompted Henry Ford to design the first affordable production car, and to solve that problem, right? When people relied so heavily on the horse and carriage, businesses and the economy relied so heavily on the horse and carriage, no one could see an alternative other than Henry Ford. And cars were invented, they just weren't affordable. It was Henry Ford that created the affordable production vehicle. And it kind of reminds me of where we are today. So you ask me if the sales funnel is broken. I mean, I think it is. But I think it's a very difficult thing for sales and marketing and business leaders to consider, because their entire organization is built on this system, this foundation. It'll be interesting to see how things play out over the coming years.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. It sort of reminds me of the story you told me that was sort of key to the messaging at Oracle surrounding the campaign crisis. Obviously, that was in the B2C world, creating a lot of noise in consumers' inboxes. But, we're seeing that bleed into the B2B space. Buyers have to try and cut through so much noise, so many people that are standing on soapboxes making the same claims, that something needs to change significantly, or at least that's my opinion. So, a question: if I'm responsible for sales and marketing within my organisation, what should be at the top of my priority list?
I think talent is number one. So hiring the right talent to help you deliver on your business, your commercial objectives, I think is key. But being mindful of the fact that the buyers as we once knew them, that their behaviour has changed significantly. And so when you're qualifying for that talent or enabling that talent, it's critical that you're hiring someone that is adaptable enough, coachable enough to learn new skills to address that change in buyer behaviour. I see that as the number one problem for any business right now is there is no sales methodology or approach that addresses the problem that we have today as businesses because it's new. We talk a lot about walking digital corridors and the value of learning a new approach to developing pipeline. I say a new approach is not a new approach. It's about, it's really about three things when you boil it down. It's about developing your personal brand, connecting with people consistently and creating content that makes you stand out and look different, so you increase your chances of building relationships with your target audience in a way that isn't selling to them, but is human and authentic. And very, very, very few salespeople are doing that today.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. I think it's strange, isn't it? In the digital world, it almost seems that common decency is forgotten about because it's on tech. There's not that, or there's a lack of that face-to-face human connection. So, people will just, pitch slap or which is a new phrase. I'm not sure if you're familiar. When people buy from people at the end of the day, so we need to be building these relationships. I mean, there's a wide variety of research out there, but when we consider that pitch slap might at best appeal to 5% of your total addressable market, those that are in market, the quantity is not quite there, but additionally, by that point, it's already too late because, as you said, the buyers completed a large proportion of their journey already, to the extent that, they've created their shortlist. Each member of the decision-making unit has their favourite. And, if an RFP's already been released, it's more than likely that one of your competitors has actually helped them to write it, leaving you at even more of a disadvantage.
Yeah.
I mean, more recently, there's a study that was just released by Harvard Business Review that 90% of purchases, or 90% of the time, buyers will purchase from a vendor that was included in their day one shortlist.
Yeah.
So, even if you are reaching out at the right time, if you're not on that first shortlist, you don't stand much of a chance, really.
Yeah. Well, and it highlights the importance of those boundaries and respecting those digital boundaries. Because if you are pitch slapping, right? So if you're connecting with someone and then pitching to them straight away, that turns them off, turns everyone off. We've all had those messages on LinkedIn. And I think if you're respectful of people's boundaries when they're outside of that, when they're not in market, right? And you put the effort in to build a relationship with them as a human being because you found mutual, things that are in common. And you've been creating content consistently that makes you look more attractive to your target audience, you're more likely to be that on that shortlist, that day one shortlist, because you haven't been this annoying cold calling, cold emailing individual, which, as we know, Trust Radius found that those two things are in the top 5 things that are the reason buyers don't buy from vendors. So if you've respected those boundaries and you've built those relationships digitally, then I think you increase your chances significantly of making the shortlist. And then you're more likely to have that conversation when they're in market, and you're in a better position to teach them a new perspective because you've built a degree of trust or credibility, at least.
Yeah, certainly. I just want to circle back to a point you made about the sort of seismic shifts in buyer behaviours that we've seen more in a more apparent way in recent years. But as you said, it's been taking place for quite some time now. So how can we more effectively align ourselves with the buyer's decisioning journey?
There was a piece on Gartner wrote an article, really interesting article, that the B2B buyer journey. It just highlights how complex it is. So I think it's impossible to be involved in that every step of the way as a seller, as a vendor. But I do think it's a worthwhile exercise. So there's a couple of things. I think number one, there's a worthwhile exercise to be done as an organisation to ask yourselves how buyer-centric you are. And I don't mean just your salesperson, but I mean your organisation. Is your go-to-market strategy one that's been designed to be buyer-centric through the eyes of the buyer? Is marketing creating content that is informing and guiding the buyer through their journey? Is your sales strategy and the process that you follow geared towards guiding, informing, guiding, even coaching your buyer? And are your sellers enabled and coached against a set of behaviours that not only increase the probability of you winning business, but actually are externally focused as well as internally focused. So they're designed to encourage your buyer to do the things that will increase probability of actually them purchasing something. Actually, that was one thing, but it was a bigger thing. There wasn't two things.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point, particularly surrounding the coaching element of it. I think what we forget often is that salespeople sell a lot more frequently than our buyers buy. In some cases, it's trying to decide which vendor to work with is a minefield in itself. But additionally, the internal politics that a buyer has to navigate in order to win buy-in from other stakeholders, that's complex in itself. Trying to get budget approved, again, there's a number of really difficult tasks that a buyer has to complete throughout the process, and we just see through a keyhole.
Yeah, it reminds me of forget the company name now, but we had a customer come in and do a talk. They had now joined our company. They joined Oracle, but they'd been sold to successfully, and he was describing how, in order to successfully build consensus within his organisation to buy the solution that we were proposing, he had to become like this ambassador, this champion, and lobby for the solution to the problem. And he would do webinars and write pieces and speak to as many people as possible to obtain support to make the purchase happen. And it was a full-time job for him, for a period of time.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, so obviously that job in itself has been made a lot more difficult with economic headwinds blowing a gale. So, to what extent should businesses, and this is sales organisations, be reconsidering what their focus is for the year ahead? A number of organisations that I've spoken to, they've shifted from an acquisition focus to more of an expansion focus. What are your thoughts on that topic?
In the sense of prioritising what they do, or in the sense of us, a seller selling to a buyer?
In the sense of, if you're a sales leader, should you be tasking your sales force with catching new logos, or should there be more of a focus on maximising the amount of revenue that you're able to generate from your existing clientele?
Yeah. Well, that specific point with the economic headwinds in mind, my view is businesses should be doing both. And if you truly understand your value proposition and you've aligned your teams to it, and there's complete clarity on the differentiating commercial value that you deliver, then it's very easy to create a strategy that aligns your organization to do both jobs successfully. And there's a few thoughts there, right? But on one side, it's okay. Well, what is my value story? What's my path to value for a typical customer, a new customer coming on board, or an existing customer that I'm working with? How do we drive them through that path to value to help them realize value? But critically, I think, what are the behaviors that our teams need to be doing, the activities, the behaviors on a daily basis to enable both sides of that coin, acquisition and retention? And how is the business coaching the people to that, to those behaviors? And if I think about where I think most businesses fall down, all things being equal, it's that ability to calculate that differentiating commercial value and as a sales leader, coach your sales reps to coach the buyer successfully. If we think about the Challenger sale, if we think about Matt Dixon's Jolt effect, 50% of deals don't happen because of the status quo. And within that, there are a couple of reasons why, and it's indecision because of fear of change, indecision because they're unable to get the support that they need. And I honestly think that if you know your differentiating commercial value and you can calculate that, but more importantly, you can bring some of these other dimensions in terms of the stakeholders, tailoring that message to the stakeholders that might have individual concerns or collective concerns, visibility on dependencies within the business that are preventing a decision to be made, or they can't quite see the path to value. I think if you can address that and help your customer address that, understand it, calculate the differentiating commercial value you deliver, align to a pathway to success, addressing all of those dependencies and those concerns, and you can demonstrate that you can help your buyer manage that gives them a degree of certainty to have the confidence to make the decision to overcome what is one of our biggest competitors in sales, which is the status quo.
Yeah, certainly. Well, look, I think we've covered a lot more than we initially planned on covering. I think if we wrap it up there, are there any final thoughts there from you? And please let listeners know where they can find you and where's best to reach out.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was, I think, a little bit longer than we thought. We initially said 15 minutes, but it was a good conversation. Yeah. Hopefully I haven't rambled too much for you on your first podcast. But yeah, in terms of where you can find me, LinkedIn is always the best place. I'm also active on Twitter, so Alex_Supero. I'm also active on Guild, and I'm hosting 2 communities. One is Walking Digital Corridors, and the other is B2B Sales Pros. So please come and check them out. And my contact details are on LinkedIn. So I'd love to speak to anybody that has found any of this conversation of interest, and look forward to connecting.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for joining us, Alex, and hopefully that's been, informative, insightful, or just entertaining, if nothing else. And look forward to hopefully having people back soon.